Chosen one, listen carefully, because sometimes the greatest changes in your life begin before you can see them. There are seasons when you believe nothing is happening, when your prayers seem unanswered, when your future looks exactly like your past. But what if the silence does not mean that God has forgotten you? What if it means something is being prepared that you are not yet equipped to recognize? We often assume that when God is doing something significant, it should be obvious. We expect a dramatic sign, a sudden revelation, a person appearing at exactly the right moment with every detail perfectly aligned. But life rarely works that way. Some of the most important transformations begin quietly. A conversation happens. A person crosses your path. An opportunity appears. Something that once felt impossible suddenly becomes possible. And only later do you understand why that moment mattered. This is where human psychology becomes fascinating. Your mind naturally looks for patterns based on what you already know. You predict tomorrow by studying yesterday. If your previous relationships were painful, you may unconsciously expect the next one to hurt. If you have repeatedly been disappointed, you may protect yourself by assuming disappointment is coming again. Your past becomes a lens through which you interpret your future. But faith challenges that lens. Faith asks you to consider that your future does not have to be a repetition of your history. And that is especially important when we talk about relationships. You may have created an internal picture of the person you believe you are supposed to marry. Perhaps you imagined someone your age, someone who looks a certain way, comes from a certain background, or arrives through a predictable path. But sometimes life introduces someone who does not fit the picture at all. They may be younger than you, and immediately your mind may say, "That cannot be right." But pause for a moment. Age is a number. Character is a pattern. Maturity is a way of living. Compatibility is demonstrated through values, communication, responsibility, respect, and emotional stability. If you become so attached to your expectations that you cannot recognize something meaningful simply because it arrived differently, then your expectations can become a barrier to your own growth. This does not mean every younger person you meet is automatically destined to become your spouse. Discernment matters. Wisdom matters. Healthy boundaries matter. A relationship should never be justified simply because you want to believe it is God's plan. Real love must withstand honesty, responsibility, mutual respect, and reality. But there is another truth you need to understand. Sometimes God changes the way you recognize an answer. You may have prayed for love, but you imagined a specific appearance. You may have prayed for companionship, but you imagined a specific age. You may have prayed for someone who understands you, but you imagined that person would enter your life through a particular circumstance. And perhaps the lesson is not that your prayer was wrong. Perhaps the lesson is that your imagination was too limited. Think about how often human beings reject possibilities simply because they arrive in unfamiliar packaging. We confuse unfamiliar with impossible. We confuse different with wrong. We confuse unexpected with unworthy. But growth often begins at the exact point where your expectations end. So instead of asking, "Does this person look like the person I imagined?" ask better questions. Do they bring honesty into your life? Do they respect your boundaries? Do your values align? Can you communicate without manipulation? Do you become healthier, wiser, and more purposeful around each other? Can the relationship survive reality, not just fantasy? Those questions reveal far more than a number ever could. And perhaps that is what this season is really preparing you to understand. The revelation is not merely about discovering who you will marry. It is about becoming the kind of person who can recognize healthy love when it appears. Because sometimes the blessing is hidden inside the unexpected. Stop demanding that your future look familiar. Become wise enough to recognize it when it arrives. Now, there is something else you need to understand, because this is where many people make a serious mistake. When they hear that someone younger may enter their future, their first reaction is to focus on the number. They ask, "How many years younger?" They ask, "What will people think?" They ask, "Will this really work?" But very few people stop to ask the deeper question, who is this person becoming? Because age can tell you how long someone has been alive. It cannot tell you how deeply they have learned. It cannot tell you how they handle disappointment. It cannot tell you whether they know how to communicate. It cannot tell you whether they can take responsibility for their actions. And it certainly cannot tell you whether they have the emotional maturity required to build a lasting relationship. We live in a culture that loves measurable things. We measure age, income, status, appearance, achievements, followers, possessions. We create categories because categories make the world feel predictable. But relationships do not become meaningful because two people satisfy a checklist. They become meaningful because two human beings develop trust, understanding, respect, and shared purpose. That distinction is important. Imagine meeting someone younger than you who has experienced enough in life to understand responsibility, who listens before reacting, who does not play emotional games, who knows how to apologize, who respects your boundaries, and who genuinely wants to grow. Now compare that with someone older who has never learned accountability, who avoids difficult conversations, who manipulates affection, or who refuses to grow. Which person is actually more mature? The answer becomes obvious. Chronological age and emotional maturity are not identical things. This is why you must learn to look beneath the surface. Perhaps the person who eventually becomes important in your life will surprise you because they do not match the image you created years ago. Maybe you expected someone older because you associated age with wisdom. Maybe you assumed that experience automatically produces maturity. But experience alone does not transform a person. Reflection does. Responsibility does. Self-awareness does. The willingness to learn does. A person can live many years and never seriously examine themselves. Another person can experience fewer years but spend those years learning deeply. And this is where your own psychology can either help you or deceive you. If you have been hurt before, you may build rules to protect yourself. Never trust someone like that again. Never date someone younger. Never take a chance. These rules can feel like wisdom because they make you feel safe. But sometimes what we call wisdom is simply fear wearing a sophisticated disguise. Real wisdom is more flexible. It does not say, ignore every warning. It says, pay attention to the right things. So if someone younger enters your life, do not immediately crown them as your destined partner, but do not automatically reject them either. Observe them. Watch how they treat people who cannot give them anything. Watch how they behave when they are frustrated. Watch whether their words match their actions. Watch whether they respect your no. Watch whether they can disagree without becoming cruel. Watch whether they celebrate your growth instead of competing with it. And perhaps most importantly, watch what happens inside you when you are around them. Healthy love should not require you to abandon your identity. It should not constantly create anxiety, confusion, or emotional instability. It should give you room to become more honest, more courageous, and more grounded. This is why the younger age may not be the real story at all. The real story may be that you are being taught to look beyond appearances. You are being challenged to stop measuring a person by what society immediately notices and start measuring them by what actually sustains a life together. Because attraction may open the door, but character determines whether you can stay in the room. And if someone enters your life unexpectedly, remember this. Do not judge the future by the number on their birth certificate. Judge the relationship by the character they bring into your life. Now let's go deeper, because sometimes the most important signs in your life are not dramatic. They do not arrive with flashing lights or some extraordinary event that removes every doubt. Often they appear through ordinary moments that become meaningful only when you look back. You may have already encountered something or someone that you dismissed because you were looking at the situation through your old expectations. Maybe you met this person unexpectedly. Maybe you kept crossing paths without planning it. Maybe a conversation happened at a moment when you desperately needed encouragement. Maybe you noticed that you could talk to this person with an unusual sense of ease. Or perhaps circumstances repeatedly placed you in the same environment, even though neither of you initially intended for it to happen. Now, be careful here. Not every coincidence is a divine message. Not every repeated number, random encounter, or emotional feeling means someone is destined to marry you. Discernment requires something more intelligent than simply collecting signs. It requires you to examine the pattern, the character, and the fruit of what is happening. Because the human mind is incredibly powerful and incredibly vulnerable to confirmation bias. When you strongly want something to be true, your mind naturally starts noticing evidence that supports it. You see the message, the coincidence, the familiar name, the unexpected encounter, and suddenly everything appears connected. But wisdom requires you to slow down. Instead of asking, "What sign proves this person is the one?" ask, "What is this relationship producing in me?" That question changes everything. Is it producing peace or obsession? Is it producing clarity or constant confusion? Is it encouraging patience or creating desperation? Is it helping you become more responsible, honest, and emotionally mature? Or is it causing you to ignore reality because you desperately want the story to be true? These questions protect you from confusing fantasy with faith. Sometimes the most meaningful indication is not an extraordinary coincidence. It is consistency, someone who repeatedly demonstrates kindness, someone who respects your boundaries, someone who communicates honestly, someone who does not disappear whenever life becomes difficult, someone who encourages your purpose instead of demanding that you abandon it, someone whose private behavior matches their public image. Those things may not feel as exciting as a dramatic sign, but they are far more valuable. Think about it. A coincidence can happen in 1 second. Character takes time to reveal itself. That is why patience matters. If someone younger than you begins to appear more frequently in your life, you do not need to immediately decide what it means. You do not need to force a conclusion. Allow time to reveal what emotion cannot. Watch, listen, learn, let the relationship develop naturally. Because if something is genuinely healthy, it should not require manipulation to survive. And perhaps there is another reason you have been noticing certain patterns lately. Maybe your own internal world is changing. Sometimes the sign is not that another person has suddenly appeared. Sometimes the sign is that you are finally ready to see what you previously overlooked. A person can be standing in front of you for months or even years, but if your mind is trapped in an old definition of love, you may never recognize their value. You may have been searching for someone who fits your expectations while overlooking someone who fits your values. That is a profound psychological shift. The moment you stop asking, "Does this person match my fantasy?" and begin asking, "Does this person demonstrate the character I value?" your entire understanding of relationships changes. And this is where faith and wisdom can work together. Faith allows you to remain open. Wisdom teaches you to remain discerning. Faith says, "I do not need to know everything immediately." Wisdom says, "I will observe before I decide." Faith gives you patience. Wisdom gives you boundaries. Together, they prevent you from either becoming cynical or becoming naive. So if someone unexpected enters your life, especially someone younger than you, do not rush to label the connection. Give it room to reveal itself. Let actions speak louder than assumptions. Let time test consistency. Let character answer questions that attraction cannot answer. Because sometimes the greatest revelation is not a voice telling you exactly who your future spouse will be. Sometimes it is the gradual realization that the person you never expected is teaching you to see love differently. Do not chase signs. Build discernment. What is truly meant for your life will become clearer through truth, character, time, and peace. And now we come to something even deeper, because the person who enters your future may not simply be someone who loves the person you are today. They may be someone who recognizes the person you are becoming. That distinction matters. Most people want to be loved for who they are right now. They want someone to look at their current circumstances, their current appearance, their current achievements, and say, "I choose you." And there is nothing wrong with wanting that. But mature love goes further. Mature love sees potential without trying to control it. The right person does not merely admire your present identity. They respect your journey. They understand that you have chapters behind you that shaped you. They understand that you have made mistakes, survived disappointments, learned difficult lessons, and perhaps become more cautious because of what you experienced. They do not demand that you pretend those chapters never happened. Instead, they see what those experiences produced. Maybe you became stronger. Maybe you became wiser. Maybe you learned how to set boundaries. Maybe you finally stopped accepting the kind of treatment you once tolerated. Maybe you discovered that being alone is better than being surrounded by people who constantly diminish you. And perhaps that transformation is preparing you for a relationship you would not have been capable of handling years ago. This is one of the great paradoxes of life. Sometimes the delay is not punishment. Sometimes the delay is preparation. You may have wondered why certain relationships failed. You may have asked why someone you loved walked away. You may have questioned why your timeline looked so different from everyone else's. But what if some of those experiences were teaching you what you needed to know before the next chapter? Psychologically, this makes sense. Every significant experience can reshape the way we understand ourselves. Pain can either make us bitter or make us conscious. Rejection can either destroy our confidence or teach us that our worth cannot depend entirely on another person's approval. And when you finally understand that, your standards change. You stop looking for someone to rescue you. You stop looking for someone to complete you. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop believing that constant uncertainty is evidence of passion. Instead, you begin looking for partnership, and that is the kind of relationship that can survive an unexpected age difference. Because if someone younger enters your life, the question should not simply be, why would someone younger want me? That question often reveals insecurity. A better question is, what do we bring out in each other? Does this person make you feel seen without making you dependent? Do they challenge you without disrespecting you? Do they support your goals without trying to control them? Can you celebrate each other's differences? Can you have difficult conversations without threatening the relationship? Can you grow individually while still growing together? These are the questions that reveal compatibility. And perhaps the person you eventually marry will be younger because they see something in you that others fail to recognize. Not because they are fascinated by your age, but because they are drawn to your character. They may see your resilience. They may see your wisdom. They may see the way you carry responsibility. They may see the softness you developed after surviving hard things. They may see the person beneath the history. But remember something important. You should be able to see them too. Do not make the relationship entirely about being chosen. Choose consciously. Observe their character. Respect their individuality. Ask whether they are prepared for the responsibilities of a serious relationship. Love is not simply about finding someone who says, I want you. It is about finding two people who can truthfully say, I am willing to build with you. Or that requires maturity from both sides. And this is why you should stop obsessing over the exact identity of the person supposedly coming into your life. The more important preparation is happening inside you. Become emotionally stable. Become honest about what you need. Become courageous enough to communicate. Become disciplined enough to maintain boundaries. Become wise enough to recognize unhealthy patterns. Become humble enough to keep growing, because the person who is right for your future will not need you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. They will not compete with your purpose. They will not demand that you abandon your identity. They will walk beside you. And perhaps that is the real revelation. The future relationship may surprise you, because the person is younger, unexpected, or completely different from what you imagined. But if the connection is healthy, mutual, respectful, and grounded in genuine character, the difference may become less important than the direction you are traveling together. The right person will not merely love where you are, they will respect where you are going. Now, there is one final obstacle that can quietly destroy a relationship before it even has the opportunity to become something meaningful: the opinions of other people. Because when something does not fit the expectations of society, people become uncomfortable. They start asking questions. They start making assumptions. They start giving advice that was never requested. And an age difference can become one of those situations. Maybe someone younger expresses genuine interest in you, and immediately you begin thinking about what your family will say. What will your friends think? What will people at work say? Will they judge you? Will they assume something about your relationship without knowing anything about it? And slowly you begin making decisions based on the imagined reactions of people who will not have to live with the consequences of those decisions. That is a dangerous way to live. But understand this carefully. Ignoring people's opinions does not mean ignoring wisdom. There is a difference between social pressure and legitimate concern. If someone criticizes your relationship simply because the person is younger, that criticism may be based on assumptions. But if someone raises concerns about manipulation, emotional immaturity, dishonesty, dependency, or incompatible life goals, you should listen. Maturity is not saying, "Nobody can tell me anything." Maturity is saying, "I will listen to everything, examine it carefully, and make my decision based on truth." That is a completely different mindset. You do not need everyone's approval to make a responsible decision about your future, but you do need enough self-awareness to question your own desires. Because sometimes we want something so badly that we become willing to call every obstacle the enemy and every desire a divine sign. That is not faith. That is emotional attachment disguised as certainty. Real faith can tolerate examination. If a relationship is healthy, honest, and genuinely built on mutual respect, you should not be afraid to examine it. You should be able to ask difficult questions. Are both people emotionally prepared? Are both adults capable of making their own decisions? Are boundaries respected? Are expectations about marriage, family, finances, lifestyle, and future compatible? Can both people communicate honestly? Is there freedom to say no without fear? Is there mutual respect rather than dependence? These questions are not signs of doubt. They are signs of wisdom. And if you are ever in a relationship where you feel pressured to ignore obvious problems because someone tells you, "God brought this person to you," stop and think. No spiritual language can transform an unhealthy relationship into a healthy one. Love does not require you to abandon reason. Faith does not require you to abandon wisdom. And a future marriage should not be built on fantasy. It should be built on reality. This is especially important when there is an age difference because people may assume that the older person automatically has more power, experience, or control. That is why mutual consent, independence, respect, and emotional equality matter tremendously. The goal is not to prove to everyone that your relationship is destined. The goal is to determine whether the relationship is actually worthy of being built. There is tremendous freedom in understanding that. You don't have to convince the world. You don't have to defend every decision. You don't have to announce every detail of your relationship. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is quietly observe, communicate honestly, and allow the relationship to develop without performing it for an audience. Because when you constantly seek approval, you give other people control over your emotional life, and you were not created to live your entire life trying to satisfy everyone else's expectations. Your responsibility is to live with integrity, make decisions you can defend with truth, choose relationships that produce growth rather than destruction. And if someone genuinely belongs in your future, you should not need to manufacture the connection. Healthy love has a certain steadiness to it. It can withstand questions, it can survive conversations, it can handle reality. So if the person who enters your life is younger than you, do not immediately reject them because society has an opinion, but do not automatically accept them because you want the story to be true. Seek truth over approval, wisdom over excitement, and character over appearances. Because when you stop living for other people's expectations, you finally create enough space to recognize what is genuinely right for your life.